Good evening, everyone. Did you have a spectacular night? Yes. Thank you for being part of this special night with us. I'd like to start with my congratulations to Rich, Ginny, to Steve in his absence, and to Wes, and to your teams at BCG, IBM, Nationwide, and Northrop Grumman. You are building inclusive workplaces and moving the needle in industries where the intentionality of leaders is critical. Thank you for what you've done, for showing us all the way, and congratulations on this special recognition. Arnold, I am so glad I didn't have to speak immediately after you. You embody the very characteristics of an inclusive leader, serving as an inspirational role model with grace and humility. You are truly a champion for change. Thank you for being our dinner chair this evening, for sharing a beautiful and moving and inspirational story with this audience, one that we will not forget for a very long time. Thank you. Tonight marks the end of a life-changing journey. It began almost 12 years ago when Eileen Lang recruited me to lead Catalyst Canada, transforming me from consultant to advocate, infusing my life with the richness of purpose-driven work. And while this speech isn't about me, I promise, it's about you. It does start with my deep gratitude for the privilege of being part of this community. To my Catalyst colleagues, past and present, you have changed my life. From my first day to my last, I have been inspired by your unwavering passion for our mission. Forever a Catalysta. To the Catalyst CEO Champions for Change, our boards of advisors, and many partners and friends in the room tonight, thank you for standing with us and our mission to build workplaces that work for women. To the Catalyst Board of Directors, to Kathy, to Peter Voser, to the entire board, I am grateful for the opportunity to learn from you. I'm grateful for your friendship and your leadership. It's been an honor to work with you. Thank you. Tonight, I take the stage for the last time. When I introduced myself to you in 2014, I shared my story. It began in a house full of love and laughter, but with no central heating, that sat on a gravel road in rural Canada. My unlikely journey took me here, standing on this stage in New York City with some of the world's most influential business leaders. Growing up, I understood that education was my passport to success. I put myself through university with scholarships and summer jobs. When I started working, I never questioned the fact that my colleagues were virtually all white and that my bosses were virtually all men. It didn't occur to me that the unconscious biases of leaders may have influenced their hiring choices, or that I may have been the beneficiary of those same biases. What I could see and what I didn't see looked completely normal to me. And so I believed that every opportunity that came my way was one that I had earned through hard work. I didn't think about race because I was part of the majority in every room and every situation. But gender was different. Being a woman in business meant that I was a minority in every workplace. And it became pretty clear pretty quickly that I'd have to work doubly hard to advance. After graduation, I gratefully accepted an entry-level job for which I had all the required qualifications. despite being told that I would start at a lower band and lower salary until I could prove myself. 2 years later, Anita Hill turned me into a declared feminist and taught me to see differently. The confirmation hearings where she was put on trial for having the courage to speak truth to power left me angry. For her, for me, for all women. You see, those hearings came just as I was navigating the workplace for the first time, grudgingly laughing along when one of my bosses suggested that people might start to wonder what was going on during those frequent business trips I was taking with my male colleagues. Gritting my teeth when I was talked over in meetings, or when it was assumed that as the only woman in the room, I'd make the coffee or take the notes. Seething inside, but saying nothing when I did all the work, but someone else took all the credit. Almost 30 years in the work world has taught me that I was not alone, that these daily microaggressions are experienced by virtually every woman in every workplace and are all too familiar to the women in the room tonight. And there's cold comfort in that. But the Me Too movement has uncovered a sad truth, that the harassment faced by Anita Hill 2 decades ago continues to face women in every industry. And it continues largely because a fundamental power imbalance continues to exist in virtually every workplace. Consider this. The first woman to be recorded on the Fortune 500 list of CEOs was Katharine Graham in 1972, the heroine of this year's award-winning film, The Post. And in April 2018, a few weeks from now, the number of women CEOs on the Fortune 500 will stand at 24. That's right. It's taken almost half a century to go from 1 to 24. And let me take you back to some of the research that Catalyst released when I first joined this organization. One study found that women of color were faced with the strategies of either blending in by forming relationships with those in positions of power, typically those who were white and/or male, or sticking together with those who are racially similar. Our study, The Double-Bind Dilemma for Women in Leadership, documented the Goldilocks syndrome faced by women who are evaluated against a male standard of leadership. Women are either too soft or too tough, but never just right. They're either competent or liked, but rarely both. And the 2006 census of women board directors of the Fortune 500 reported that women held 14.6% of board seats, women of color just 3.1. Fast forward, and here's the work we've released as my career at Catalyst comes to a close. Just a few weeks ago, our latest research on the emotional tax among women and men of color in the workplace found that being on guard, consciously preparing for bias or discrimination in the workplace, is linked to women of color reporting that they are more likely to leave their employers. The representation of women on Fortune 500 boards increased to 20.2% in 2016. And I guess we'd call 5.6 percentage points in 10 years progress. But women of color remain stuck at 3.8%. That's right, a change of 0.7 percentage points in 10 years. So while we lament the fact that many women have failed to shatter the glass ceiling, we must acknowledge that the intersection of gender and race, too often unseen, by men and white women like me has left women of color to confront a concrete ceiling. And yet somehow, despite the biases, the microaggressions, the harassment, the lack of role models, we continue to collectively scratch our heads and wonder why we're not making enough progress fast enough. And while this is not the fault of any one of us, it's time. It's time that we confront the myth of the meritocracy and acknowledge that bias and privilege continue to limit opportunities for some of the most talented people in our workplaces. It's time that the fight for workplace inclusion stops being the responsibility of women and people of color and becomes the responsibility of each and every one of us, with men as full partners and champions, believing that progress for women is progress for everyone. Because making this someone else's problem to solve hasn't gotten us far enough, fast enough. It's time that white women acknowledge our privilege and ensure that our advocacy benefits all women. And it's time for men of color to acknowledge that while you face your own set of deeply entrenched biases, your sisters face a double layer of bias because they are neither white nor male. To the white men in the room, I've shared my personal journey with you with the hope that you will see parallels in your own experience and perceptions. Most of you grew up never thinking about your gender, just as I grew up never thinking about my race. You moved ahead in your careers believing, as I did, that every opportunity was equal and earned, that the mentorship and sponsorship propelling you to leadership was based entirely on merit. But you have benefited from the privilege of being surrounded by role models, never questioning whether a leadership position was open to someone who looked like you. You have benefited from being part of networks that meant you've never faced the challenge of deciding whether to fit in or stand out. You just naturally belonged, and that's not your fault. But it is time for you to call out and challenge bias. It's time for you to actively mentor and sponsor women now more than ever. Because at this important moment, in the long journey to true equality, the last thing we need is to retreat to our separate corners. For men to shy away from giving a woman the feedback she needs to advance, to avoid building bridges and having working relationships with women, or to refuse to get to know her over a meal, to stop advocating on her behalf because of the fear of what someone might say. And it's certainly not time for women to forget that there are many more good men than there are Harvey Weinsteins in our organizations and in our corners. Just look around this room. Of course, moving ahead across genders, races, and ethnicities to build inclusive workplaces means that we must spend time getting to know each other, intentionally creating the kind of understanding that comes naturally with those who are most like us, or those we get to know as colleagues and human beings, those who show us the different is good, those we see without thinking, and those we don't. In a speech I attended last fall, I heard the tale of two people meeting each other on a path in an African village. One greets the other by saying, "Hello, how are you?" The other responds not with "Fine, how are you?" but with the far more powerful, I see you. I see you. This is the missing link between diversity and inclusion, the secret to creating an environment where team members are simultaneously feel that they belong and are valued for who they uniquely are. Not standing out or fitting in, but both. I see you. It's this focus on inclusive workplace that we celebrate in these 4 remarkable honorees tonight. Their amazing work and all of the equally committed people in this room, that's what makes me optimistic after an undeniably tough year for women at work. And so I end where I began, with a sense of hope that we've reached an inflection point from which there is no turning back, and one final ask of everyone in the room, that we each accept and act on our share of responsibility to build workplaces that work for women, understanding that workplaces that work for women work for everyone, that we stop and truly see each other, because it's time. Thank you very much.